You want to know what I think of your little report, Sergeant? Colonel Richard Hale snatched the intelligence folder from Elena Hart's hands, held it over the trash can, and released it. Papers scattered across the floor. He stepped on it, deliberately, slowly, ground his boot into 11 days of work like it was dirt. That's what I think. Outside that door, 480 Marines were already climbing into vehicles, engines running. Heading straight toward a valley Elena had proven with cold hard evidence was a perfect kill zone. The man with the power to stop the slaughter had just stomped on the only warning they had. Before we go further, if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The signal came in at 3:14 in the morning. Most people at Forward Operating Base Sentinel were still asleep, the kind of heavy, dreamless sleep that combat zones produce in exhausted bodies that have stopped expecting peace. The generators hummed their low, familiar drone. The desert wind pushed against the walls of the communications tent. Somewhere outside, a door slammed in the darkness, and nobody woke up to check it. But Sergeant Elena Hart was already awake. She had never gone to sleep. She was sitting in front of her monitoring station with a cold cup of coffee beside her and headphones pressed so tightly against her ears that the edges had left red marks on the sides of her face. Her fingers moved across the keyboard steadily, methodically, the way they always did when something had caught her attention and wouldn't let go. And something had caught her attention, something that made the back of her neck feel cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. She had been tracking a particular frequency band for 11 days. Not because she had been ordered to, not because it was part of her official tasking. She had been tracking it because a pattern had started to emerge 3 weeks earlier, subtle enough that most people would have missed it, but not subtle enough to escape Elena Hart. Elena was 26 years old. She had been a communications specialist for 4 years. She was not infantry. She had never fired a weapon in combat. She had never led a patrol or called in an airstrike or navigated through a mine-ridden road under enemy fire. The men on this base were quick to remind her of those facts whenever she said something they didn't like. And lately she had been saying a lot of things they didn't like. The signal that came in at 0314 was different from anything she had intercepted before. It was short, deliberately short, the kind of transmission that told you the people sending it had been trained to stay off the air, that they knew longer signals could be triangulated, could be traced, could be used against them. But even in its brevity, even in the compressed, clipped cadence of the coded language being used, Elena heard something. She played it back 3 times, then 4, then 7. She wrote the phrase down in her notebook, the paper one, not the digital log, because she had learned that some things needed to be written by hand to feel real. The phrase, translated loosely from the dialect she had spent the last 8 months studying, meant something close to, "The road has been prepared. Guests arriving soon." She stared at that phrase for a long time. Then she pulled up the terrain maps she had been building for the past 2 weeks. Not official maps, her own maps assembled from satellite imagery from patrol reports she had requested access to, from elevation data she had cross-referenced with historical engagement records. She spread them across her second monitor and started overlaying signal intercept positions. Her stomach dropped. The valley, the northern valley, the long, narrow passage that cut between 2 ridgelines approximately 40 kilometers from the base, the route that command had designated as the primary logistics corridor for the upcoming supply convoy. The route that had been locked into the operational plan 3 days ago. The route that 480 Marines were scheduled to travel in less than 72 hours. She looked at the terrain. She looked at the intercept positions. She looked at the phrase in her notebook. The road has been prepared. She picked up her pen and started calculating. By 5:30 in the morning, Elena had 4 pages of notes and a map covered in hand-drawn markings. She had identified what she believed were 3 primary signal origin points, 2 on the western ridgeline, 8 above the northern valley, 1 on the eastern slope. Based on the frequency patterns, the traffic density, and the timing of transmissions relative to known patrol movements, she had constructed a picture that made her hands shake slightly as she looked at it. It wasn't just an ambush, it was a designed ambush. Coordinated, layered, the kind of thing that took time to put together, that required multiple teams working in concert, that required reconnaissance of the route, which meant someone had been watching the base, watching the patterns, watching the convoy corridor for weeks. She organized everything into a briefing package. She was meticulous about it. Every intercept time-stamped, every signal plotted on the map, every translated phrase written out in full with the original notation beside it. She cross-referenced the terrain analysis with historical records showing previous enemy engagements in similar geography. She included a vulnerability assessment, what the convoy would face at the specific choke point she had identified, the kill zone, the narrow section of the valley where the ridgelines pressed closest together, and there was nowhere to go. She printed everything and put it in a folder. She carried that folder to Colonel Richard Hale's office at 6:15 in the morning. Hale was already at his desk. He was a big man, not tall, but broad-built, like something that had been compressed under pressure over 30 years of service. His face carried the particular kind of lines that came not from age alone, but from sustained intensity, from decisions made and lived with and made again. He had served in 3 major conflicts. He wore his experience the way some men wore rank insignia, as something that defined him, that preceded him into every room he entered. He looked up when Elena knocked and entered. "Sergeant Hart," his voice was flat, not unfriendly exactly, but not warm either. The voice of a man who dealt with subordinates efficiently and moved on. "Sir," she placed the folder on his desk, "I have intelligence I need to brief you on. It concerns the convoy departure on Thursday." He looked at the folder. He didn't pick it up. "What kind of intelligence?" "Signal intercepts, sir. I've been tracking an unusual pattern on a secondary frequency band for 11 days. In the last 8 hours, the traffic has increased significantly and the content has shifted. I believe we are looking at active coordination of an ambush operation targeting the Northern Valley corridor." Hale was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee. "You've been tracking this independently, outside your assigned monitoring duties?" "Yes, sir. I identified the pattern as potentially significant 3 weeks ago and began." "Outside your assigned monitoring duties," he repeated, and this time it wasn't a question. Elena held her ground. "Sir, the pattern warranted attention. I've compiled everything in that folder. The intercept data, the terrain overlay, the translated phrases." Translated. He said the word with a specific weight to it. "You speak the dialect." "I've been studying it for 8 months, sir. My translations have been verified." "By who?" She paused. "By Corporal Vasquez." He cross-checked 3 of the key phrases. Corporal Vasquez is a 22-year-old radio operator who has been deployed for 4 months. Hale set down his coffee. "Sergeant, I appreciate your thoroughness. I genuinely do. But the Northern Valley route has been assessed by intelligence officers with considerably more experience than either you or Corporal Vasquez, and that assessment cleared the corridor. Sir, with respect, that assessment was completed before this traffic pattern emerged. The coordination I'm seeing in the last 8 hours specifically, the convoy departs Thursday at 05:58. The planning is complete. The orders are issued." He picked up the folder, and for a single moment, Elena felt something like hope rising in her chest, and then he opened it, glanced at the first page, and closed it again. "I'll have my staff review this when they come on duty." "Sir, if they could review it before Thursday." "Thank you, Sergeant." Dismissed. She walked back to the communications tent with the folder still in her hand. He hadn't kept it. She wasn't sure he was going to read it at all. She sat down at her station and stared at the maps on her screen. She had 48 hours. It wasn't enough time to change anything if the people who needed to change it refused to listen. She knew that. She had known it walking out of Hale's office. But she also knew something else, something she hadn't said out loud to Hale, because there wasn't a way to say it that wouldn't sound like insubordination. She knew that she was right, not the way young people are sometimes convinced they're right because of inexperience and overconfidence. She was right the way mathematics is right. The evidence pointed in one direction. The terrain supported it. The intercept data supported it. The pattern supported it. And nobody was going to listen. Corporal James Vasquez came in at 7 o'clock and found her still sitting there with the folder in her lap. "Hey." He poured himself coffee from the carafe that was always slightly burned by that hour. "How'd it go with the colonel?" "He'll have his staff review it." Vasquez heard what she wasn't saying. He sat down across from her. "Elena, don't. You can't make him listen." "I know. Then what are you going to do?" She looked at her maps. She looked at the phrase she had written in her notebook. "The road has been prepared. Guests arriving soon." "I'm going to keep listening," she said. because whoever is out there hasn't stopped talking. She was right about that too. Over the next 36 hours, Elena intercepted 11 additional transmissions on the monitored frequency. Each one was short, each one was careful. But together in aggregate, they built a picture that had moved past ambush and into something Elena could only describe in her notebook as systematic. These weren't fighters responding to an opportunity. These were trained operators executing a prepared plan. The transmissions referenced timing. They referenced positions not by name, but by number suggesting pre-designated staging points. One transmission included a phrase that Elena translated as, "Confirm the back is sealed," which she interpreted as a reference to blocking the southern exit of the valley, cutting off any retreat. She built a new briefing package, more detailed than the first. She included the new intercepts, the updated signal, plot, the translation of the blocking position reference. She included a mathematical analysis of the kill zone geometry, how the ridgeline angles and the valley width at the identified choke point created essentially perfect fields of fire for elevated weapon positions, how the natural contours of the terrain funneled everything toward a single passage where there would be no cover, no escape route, no room to maneuver. She brought it to Major Patricia Chen, the base's intelligence officer, at 1400 on Wednesday afternoon. Major Chen was different from Colonel Hale. She listened carefully, asked several sharp questions, and read through the folder with genuine attention. Elena felt for approximately 20 minutes that she was being heard. Then Chen said, "The Colonel has reviewed this analysis and made his assessment. The convoy proceeds." Major, with respect, has he reviewed this specific update? Because the intercepts from the last 12 hours significantly strengthen Elena. Chen used her first name deliberately, not warmly, but carefully, the way you use someone's first name when you want them to hear something clearly. "I hear you. I'm going to be honest with you. Your signals analysis is solid. Your terrain work is thoughtful. But you need to understand something about where we are right now. Ma'am, there's a 480 Marine convoy carrying medical supplies, ammunition, and food that have been committed, scheduled, and briefed. There are units at the forward position that have been waiting for this delivery for 9 days. There are operational timelines attached to this convoy that go above this base. To stop it, to redirect it on the basis of independently gathered intelligence from a signal specialist who is not attached to the intelligence cell, working outside her primary assignment, translating a dialect she's been studying for 8 months." She stopped. "You understand what that means politically for the people who would have to make that call?" Elena looked at her. "I understand what it means for the Marines in that convoy if nobody makes it." Chen didn't say anything for a moment. And in that silence, Elena could see something she recognized, the face of a person who believed her and wasn't going to do anything about it anyway. Something that looked for just a moment like shame. "I'll make sure the Colonel is aware of the updated intercepts," Chen said finally. "That's what I can do." Elena went back to her station. It was Wednesday evening. The convoy departed in less than 12 hours. Vasquez was watching her when she came in. He had been covering her monitoring station while she was in with Chen, and he had seen what had come in during the last 2 hours because Elena had briefed him on what to listen for, had told him exactly which frequency bands and which patterns. He had headphones around his neck and a look on his face that told her he hadn't needed to ask Chen's verdict. "2 more," he said. "Same band. One of them," he hesitated. "What?" "One of them, Elena. There's a phrase in it. I've been trying to run the dialect. I think it says," he looked down at the paper in his hand, "everything is in position." The tent was quiet. Outside, the base was going through its nighttime routines. The convoy vehicles were being loaded and staged. The Marines assigned to it were sleeping or cleaning weapons or writing letters home. Lieutenant Daniel Morgan, who was going to lead them, was probably reviewing his route cards one more time, trusting the intelligence assessment that told him the northern valley was clear. Elena looked at Vasquez. "Everything is in position," she said. "Yeah." She pulled out her map. The valley, the ridge lines, the choke point where the road turned and narrowed, and the walls rose on both sides and there was nowhere to go. She looked at it for a long time. "James," she said quietly. "Yeah. If something happens to that convoy tomorrow, if what I think is out there is actually out there, how many of them come back?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Elena closed the map. She sat very still for a long moment. Then she did something she had not done in 4 years of service. She walked to the equipment locker at the back of the tent, opened it with her access code, and looked at what was inside. Her M4 was there, clean and maintained ready. She had never fired it at anything that shot back. She picked it up. She felt the weight of it in her hands. She thought about Colonel Hale dropping her folder into the trash. She thought about Major Chen saying, "I'll make sure the colonel is aware," and the shame that had moved across her face like a shadow. She thought about the phrase in her notebook, "The road has been prepared. Guests arriving soon." She thought about 480 people who were going to get into vehicles in a few hours and drive into a valley. She put the rifle down, she sat down at her station, she put on her headphones, and she kept listening. At 2:47 in the morning, a final transmission came through. It was the longest one yet, nearly 11 seconds, which for these operators was almost reckless. Elena recorded it, played it back, wrote it down word by word. Her translation took 40 minutes, cross-checked against every reference she had. When she finished, she sat back in her chair. The transmission confirmed positions. It confirmed timing. And it contained one phrase that she had not seen before, a phrase that in the dialect being used carried a specific operational meaning she had read about in a signals intelligence brief 6 months ago. It was the phrase used to signal that an operation was active. Not being planned, not being prepared. Active. Elena stood up. She put on her jacket. She picked up her folder, the complete one, everything 11 days of work, and she walked back across the base to Colonel Hale's quarters. It was 3 in the morning. She knocked on his door anyway. His aide opened it, a young sergeant named Paulson, who looked at her with eyes that said he knew exactly who she was and why she was there, and had already been told what to do about it. "Sergeant Hart," his voice was careful, practiced. "The colonel, I need to speak to him. Right now, please. The colonel has been briefed on your concerns and has made his assessment. That assessment was made before this." She held up the folder. "There has been a final activation signal. I am telling you that this is no longer predictive intelligence. This is active reporting of an ongoing operation. The convoy departs in 3 hours. I need 5 minutes with him." Paulson looked at her. He was maybe 24. He had the face of someone being asked to carry something too heavy and knowing it. "Wait here," he said. He went inside. Elena stood in the doorway in the 3 a.m. desert dark, listening to the base breathe around her, listening to the wind, listening to the distant sound of an engine turning over somewhere across the compound. Paulson came back. "The colonel says the convoy proceeds as planned." His voice was very quiet. He wasn't entirely meeting her eyes. "He says you are to stand down and return to your duty station." Elena looked at him. She looked at the folder in her hand. She thought about 480 people. She nodded. "Thank you, Sergeant." She walked back to the communications tent. She did not return the folder to her desk. She did not sit down at her monitoring station. She went to the equipment locker. She opened it. She looked at her M4 for a long time. Then she looked at the maps. The valley. The old observation tower she had noticed 3 weeks ago when she had first started building her terrain analysis, the abandoned forward position on the northern ridgeline, approximately 3,000 meters from the choke point. Good elevation, clear sight lines to both ridgelines, good sight lines to the valley floor. A position that was, according to the satellite imagery she had pulled, currently unoccupied. She did the math. She had done it before, idly the way you do math when you're not ready to admit what you're calculating. 3,000 meters, M4 effective range significantly less than that. She would need something else. She looked at what else was in the locker. There was a reason the locker had more than one rifle. She thought about Colonel Hale dropping her folder in the trash. She thought about Elena. She closed her eyes. She opened them. She picked up the rifle. She put the folder under her arm. She left the tent. The convoy was being staged. She could hear the vehicles running, hear the voices of Marines running last checks. She moved through the base in the pre-dawn dark, away from the staging area, away from the command post toward the motor pool on the northern edge of the compound. Vasquez found her there. She didn't know how. Maybe he'd been watching. Maybe he'd followed. He came around the corner of a building and stopped when he saw her. Saw what she was carrying. Saw the map case over her shoulder. "Elena." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Go back to the station, James. You can't. Someone has to." He stood there looking at her with an expression that moved through several things: fear, recognition, something that might have been grief. "If you do this," he said, "your career is over." She looked at him. "If I don't do this, 480 people might not have a career to go back to either." He didn't say anything else. She got into the vehicle. She started the engine. She looked at the map one more time. The tower, the valley, the choke point, the ridge lines where everything was already in position. She drove north. The sun was beginning to color the edges of the sky behind her. In a little over 2 hours, Lieutenant Daniel Morgan would lead a convoy of 480 Marines into a narrow valley that a 26-year-old communications specialist had spent 11 days proving was a death trap and that every senior officer on the base had decided wasn't worth listening to. She drove with the map on the seat beside her and the cold morning air coming in through the window and the radio silence wrapping around her like a second skin. She thought about one thing as she drove, not her career, not the court-martial that was probably already waiting for her when she came back, not Colonel Hale, not Major Chen, not the aide who hadn't met her eyes at 3 in the morning. She thought about the phrase, "Everything is in position." Yes, she thought. It is. The vehicle Elena had taken was a standard utility truck. Nothing special, nothing that would draw attention if someone looked out a window at the right moment and saw it moving through the pre-dawn dark toward the northern perimeter. She had counted on that. She had counted on the fact that at 4:30 in the morning, the base was in that strange half-conscious state between night operations and day shift, where everyone who was supposed to be watching something was either exhausted or distracted, or both. She made it through the northern gate without being stopped. The guard on duty was a young lance corporal named Pete Briggs, who she had spoken to exactly twice before, once when he had asked her for directions to the mail tent, and once when she had covered the gate checkpoint for a shift during a staffing shortage 3 months ago. Briggs looked at her vehicle, looked at her face, and looked at the rifle case visible on the back seat. He hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. "Sergeant Hart, you're not on the departure manifest for..." "I'm running a signals relay check on the northern antenna array," she said. Her voice was steady. She had rehearsed it once in her head driving across the compound. "Colonel's orders. Equipment issue before the convoy window opens." Briggs looked at her for one more second. He was 20 years old and it was 4:30 in the morning, and Elena's voice carried the particular flat certainty of someone who expected to be believed because they always were. He waved her through. She drove north and didn't look in the rearview mirror. The road deteriorated quickly once she cleared the base perimeter from packed gravel to hard dirt to something that was barely a track at all cutting across terrain that the satellite maps had shown her, but that felt entirely different under the wheels of a truck at speed in the dark. She drove without headlights for the first kilometer, using the ambient light from a sky that was beginning to shift from black to deep blue at the edges. The stars were still out. She noticed them without really looking at them. She was running calculations in her head. Time to reach the observation tower 40 minutes at current speed, assuming no obstacles on the northern track. Time for the convoy to stage brief and depart from base approximately 90 minutes from now. Time for the convoy to reach the valley choke point from departure approximately 58 minutes at convoy speed through the route terrain, which meant she had at most 30 minutes at the tower before the convoy entered the valley. She pressed the accelerator harder. The truck bounced and rattled over ground that hadn't seen regular traffic in months, probably longer. The observation tower she was heading toward had been a forward watch position 18 months ago before the operational focus had shifted south and the position had been assessed as no longer necessary. Nobody went up there anymore. That was why she had chosen it. That and the elevation. That and the sight lines she had calculated over and over in her head until she could see them with her eyes closed. She was 26 years old, and she had never shot at anyone in her life. She thought about that for exactly 30 seconds while the truck climbed a rocky incline and the engine complained under the load. Then she stopped thinking about it. There wasn't room for it right now. There was only the math, the terrain, the timing, and the 480 people who were going to need someone in that tower, whether they knew it or not. Her radio crackled. She had left it on monitoring the base frequency. What came through made her stomach clench. It was Vasquez. His voice was low, careful, the voice of someone speaking close to a microphone they didn't want anyone else to hear. "Eagle 2, this is comms. Do you copy?" Eagle 2 was not a call sign. It was a code they had never officially established, that had never been written down anywhere, that had come from a conversation 3 weeks ago when Vasquez had jokingly called her that because she had spotted a signal pattern that everyone else had missed. She hadn't told him she was using it tonight. He had figured it out anyway. She keyed the radio once. A single click. Yes. "Copy that." A pause. "Elena, Paulson reported the gate inquiry to the duty officer 20 minutes ago. They know you left. She clicked the radio twice. Understood. They're not pulling the convoy. Morgan got his brief. He's moving to vehicle at 0545. Another pause, and she could hear something in his voice that he was working hard to keep controlled. I don't know what else to do from here. She keyed the radio 3 times. The code 4 nothing, it's done, don't risk yourself. She turned the radio down, but didn't turn it off. Back at the base, the staging area was organized chaos of the controlled kind, the kind that Marines produced instinctively that looked like noise from the outside, but was actually a very specific and practiced sequence of events leading toward a single outcome. Lieutenant Daniel Morgan moved through it with the quiet efficiency of someone who had run convoy operations enough times that the checklist lived in his body rather than on paper. He was 31 years old, lean, precise, careful with his words and his decisions in a way that his Marines had learned to read as competence rather than coldness. He had been in a country for 7 months. He had led 11 convoys. He had never lost a Marine. He was standing beside the lead vehicle reviewing his road cards when Sergeant First Class Dominic Reyes came up beside him. Reyes was his senior NCO 43, built like a man who had decided at some point that the physical world owed him nothing and had proceeded accordingly. He had a face like weathered rock and eyes that saw things with unsettling accuracy. You hear about the signals intel report? Reyes said, not looking at him, just standing beside him watching the Marines load vehicles. I heard, Morgan said, and I'm on him, and command assessed it and cleared the route. He folded the route card. We proceed. Reyes was quiet for a moment. The sergeant who filed it, Hart, word is she drove through the northern gate about an hour ago. Morgan looked at him then. Drove where? Nobody's sure, northern track. She took a rifle. Morgan looked back at the convoy vehicles. Something moved behind his eyes that wasn't quite readable. He was quiet for long enough that Reyes shifted his weight slightly. Sir, she's probably just, Morgan started. She's not just anything, Reyes said flatly. That woman has been screaming about this route for 11 days. Command threw her out 3 times. Now she took a rifle and drove north before the sun came up. He paused. I'm not saying anything official. I'm saying I've been doing this for 22 years, and I know what it looks like when the person who knows something is the one nobody's listening to. Morgan looked at him for a long moment. Are you telling me you think she's right? I'm telling you I think she believed it enough to throw away her career over it. Reyes's voice was very level. You can decide what that's worth. Morgan looked at the convoy. He looked at his route card. He looked north toward the ridge that separated them from the valley that was 60 kilometers away and that he was going to drive into in approximately 40 minutes. He made a decision, not the one that changed the convoy order. He didn't have the authority to do that alone, and he knew it. But a different decision, a smaller one that was entirely within his authority. Brief the gunners to stay hot, he said quietly. Every position, full alert from departure, and push the interval spacing to 300 meters between vehicles. Reyes looked at him. That's going to stretch the convoy length significantly. Yes, it is. A beat. Then Reyes almost smiled, not warmly, but with something like recognition. Yes, sir. He walked away. Morgan looked north one more time. Then he got in the lead vehicle. The convoy departed at exactly 5:58. Elena heard it on the radio. A routine departure call, standard format, nothing in the voice of the communications officer reading it to suggest anything unusual. Just a convoy leaving a base heading north on a cleared route carrying supplies that were needed. Routine, ordinary, the kind of thing that happened every day. She was at the tower. She had reached it with 11 minutes to spare, barely after a stretch of road near the base of the northern ridge had turned into something that nearly swallowed the truck's front axle and had cost her 4 minutes of careful extraction before she could continue. She had run the last 200 meters on foot, carrying the rifle in the map case and nothing else, moving up the exterior ladder of the tower that had been built to last and had, in its abandonment, become almost invisible against the ridgeline. From the top, she could see everything. The valley below her was in the early light, that specific quality of light that came just before the sun cleared the eastern ridge and turned everything sharp and shadowless. She could see the road that wound through it. She could see the choke point in the narrowing. She had mapped the section where the walls pressed inward and the road bent slightly left. and there was for approximately 300 meters nowhere to go and no cover to speak of. She could also see the ridgelines, both of them, and she could see what was on them. She had been right about the positions. She had been exactly right. Not approximately right, not directionally right, precisely, specifically, mathematically right. The emplacements she had mapped from signal intercepts were exactly where she had calculated them to be. She could see the equipment. She could see the teams. She could count them. She counted 3 machine gun positions on the western ridge, 2 RPG teams, one on the eastern slope above the choke point, one position further north to cut off any forward movement. She identified at least 4 sniper positions, 2 on each ridgeline, elevated and angled to cover the full length of the choke point. She counted all of this, mapped it against what she had in her head, and then sat with the weight of it for exactly 30 seconds. She had been right. She had been right every single time she walked into an office and told someone what was coming, and every single time she had been sent away, and now she was sitting 3,000 meters from a kill zone watching it breathe and wait for 180 vehicles to drive into it, and there was no one left to tell. There was only her. She checked her weapon. She checked her position. She thought about angles and distances with the same cold precision she brought to frequency analysis and signal mapping. She had always been good at math. She had always been good at patterns. She had spent 11 days building the most detailed picture of an ambush that anyone on that base had ever assembled, and every person who could have used it had decided she was too young, too inexperienced, too female, too far outside the infantry world to be worth believing. She settled in. She controlled her breathing. She waited. The first sound of the convoy reached her as a low vibration, not quite audible at first, more felt than heard, the kind of mechanical rumble that terrain carries differently than air. Then it became sound. Then it became visible, the first vehicle appearing at the southern entrance to the valley, moving at convoy speed. And behind it another and another, the long segmented line of it, threading into the space below her, like something that didn't know yet what it was driving into. She watched the ridgelines. She watched the emplacements she had identified. She watched the machine gun positions on the western ridge, where the teams were now clearly visible in her optic, visible in the way that people who believe they are watching prey and not being watched themselves are visible without the particular tension that comes from feeling observed. The lad vehicle reached the bend, the choke point. The valley went very quiet, and then it didn't. The first RPG came from the eastern slope exactly where she had mapped it and hit the lead vehicle, and the sound of it came to Elena a fraction of a second after she saw the impact, because sound travels slower than light, and for that fraction of a second, everything was still completely silent, and then it wasn't. Then it was everything at once, the machine guns on the western ridge opening simultaneously, the second RPG team engaging from the northern position, the snipers beginning to work, and below her, the valley floor erupting into the specific chaos of 200 men suddenly pinned in a kill zone with nowhere to go, and fire coming from every elevation around them. Elena didn't think. She was already working. She had chosen her sequence before the first shot was fired. She had looked at the positions and calculated which ones were doing the most damage, which ones were controlling the geometry of the kill zone, which ones had to go first to give the people below her any chance of moving, any chance of breaking contact, any chance of surviving the next 10 minutes. The Western Ridge machine gun positions were the anchor of the ambush. They were the positions that would pin the convoy in place while everything else worked. She went to the leftmost one first. The range was significant. The conditions were imperfect. She was elevated. There was wind coming through the valley passage. She had not zeroed this weapon at this distance under these conditions. She made the calculations she could make, accounted for what she could account for, and fired. The machine gun stopped. She moved to the second position before anyone on that ridgeline had processed what had happened. She fired twice. The second position went silent. Below her in the valley, something changed. Not the chaos continued. Marines still pinned vehicles, burning, the RPG teams still working. But something in the geometry of the ambush had shifted, had opened slightly in the way that a vise opens when one of the screws is removed. It wasn't enough yet, but it was something. She moved to the third machine gun position. This one had adjusted someone up. There had felt the change, had looked around, and was trying to understand what was happening. She could see movement, recalibration. She didn't give them time to finish it. The third machine gun went silent. In the valley below, Sergeant First Class Dominic Reyes was pressed against the side of a disabled vehicle with 3 Marines beside him and fire coming in from 3 directions, in the specific cognitive experience of a man who has been in enough combat to understand when something catastrophic is happening, but not yet to understand why it's changing. Something was changing. He could feel it. The volume of incoming fire had shifted, not stopped, not even significantly reduced, but altered in a way that he couldn't explain, that suggested something was happening to the ambush that the ambush hadn't planned for. He keyed his radio. "Actual Reyes, you getting suppression from the West Ridge." Lieutenant Morgan was behind the lead vehicle, the destroyed one, the one that had taken the first RPG, with his radio handset and his weapon and a mental map that he was updating in real time. "Negative, no fire support called. You're seeing reduction in West Ridge activity. Something's taking out the machine gun nest, sir, one at a time from the north. Someone is up there." Morgan looked up at the northern ridgeline. He looked at the observation tower that was barely visible at that distance, a dark shape against the early skyline. He thought about what Reyes had told him at the staging area, about a sergeant who had thrown away her career and driven north before sunrise with a rifle. He understood, not everything, not the details, but the essential shape of it, what was happening, who was making it happen, what it meant. "Reyes," he said, "Sir, tell the platoon leaders we're going to get a window. Brief, maybe 2 minutes. When the RPG teams go quiet, we move. Everyone, every vehicle that can roll north end of the kill zone. Do not wait for orders. When it opens, we go." "How do you know the RPG teams are going to go quiet?" "Because whoever is up there is working from a list," Morgan said, "and they know what's on it." Sam. Elena knew what was on it. She had built the list herself 11 days ago when she first mapped the positions. Machine guns first, they controlled movement. Then RPG teams, they were destroying vehicles and creating barriers. Then snipers, they were targeting leadership radio operators, anyone trying to coordinate a response. She had taken the machine guns. She was moving to the RPG teams. The eastern slope position had moved. She had expected, that had known, that once the machine guns went down, the RPG teams would understand that something was targeting them and would try to relocate. She tracked the movement. She waited for the moment it became still, again the moment that a person who is repositioning believes they have found cover and allows themselves a breath of relative stillness before they resume. She fired into that stillness. The eastern RPG position went silent. The northern position was different, better concealed, better positioned, and she could tell from the way it was operating that the person running it was experienced, was reading the battle, was already trying to understand the threat from the tower. She could see them scanning, looking north, getting close to her position in their assessment. She didn't give them the moment of stillness she had given the eastern team. She changed her calculus and fired through the movement. It took her 3 shots. Then she moved to the snipers. In the valley below her, Reyes heard the RPG fire stop. He felt it before he processed it consciously, the absence of that specific sound, the particular concussive quality of rocket-propelled rounds suddenly gone from the soundscape of the ambush. He looked at his radio. He looked north. He started moving. Up, up. All elements, we are moving north, move now. The Marines moved. The ones who could move moved, and the ones who were helping wounded moved with them, and the convoy, the parts of it that were still functional, began to push forward through the kill zone toward the northern end of the valley in a controlled surge that had the quality of something barely held together, something running on training and adrenaline and the specific, desperate energy of people who have been given an unexpected chance and are not going to waste it. Morgan was moving with them on foot beside the column radio in hand, tracking positions, calling adjustments, doing what he had been trained to do and what he was genuinely good at. He looked up at the tower once as he ran. Just once. Then he looked back at his Marines and kept moving. Elena watched them move from the tower. She was still working, still identifying, still calculating, still firing at the sniper positions that were trying to adjust to the convoy's unexpected surge. She took one, then another. The 3rd sniper position went dark. The 4th attempted to relocate under fire. She tracked it, fired. 40 minutes. That was what it took. 40 minutes from the first RPG strike to the moment when the last element of the convoy pushed through the northern end of the valley and the surviving enemy forces reduced, disrupted their carefully designed geometry, of death disassembled piece by piece from a tower they hadn't accounted for began to pull back from their positions. Elena sat in the tower with the weapon across her knees and watched them go. She was breathing hard. Her hands were steady, but her arms were shaking somewhere in the deeper muscle groups, the kind of shaking that comes not from weakness, but from sustained intensity, finally releasing. She looked at the valley below her, at the burning vehicles, at the Marines moving at the northern end, spreading out, establishing security, beginning the work of accounting for each other. She looked at what she had done. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had done the only thing available to her, and she felt the weight of the 11 days before this moment. The folders, the briefings, the trash can, the boot on her work, the 3 a.m. silence outside Hale's quarters, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Anger. Not relief, not pride. Anger. Clean and cold and very clear. The way signals are clear when everything else drops away, and the frequency you've been hunting finally comes in sharp. She put the weapon down. She took out her radio. She keyed the base frequency. Base, this is Sergeant Hart. Her voice was completely level. I am at the northern observation post. The convoy has cleared the valley. Send medical support to the northern end of the valley corridor, multiple casualties. And tell Colonel Hale. She stopped. She thought about it for exactly 1 second. Tell him the guests arrived. She put the radio down. Somewhere to the south back at the base, she knew what was already happening. She knew Hale had been notified the moment Briggs reported her at the gate. She knew the MP unit had probably already been tasked. She knew that the word unauthorized was being attached to her name in conversations that would define what happened to her next. She knew all of it. She sat in the tower and looked at the valley where 480 people were alive who might not have been, and she waited. Below her, Lieutenant Daniel Morgan was standing at the northern end of the valley, with Reyes beside him, looking back at the road they had just come through, at the burning vehicles, and the silence where machine guns had been at the observation tower on the northern ridge that was just barely visible from where they stood. Someone saved us from up there, Morgan said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir, Reyes said. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. No, sir, she wasn't. Morgan looked at the tower for a long time. Then he looked at his Marines, the ones walking, the ones being helped, the ones who were not going to walk again. He did the math that every commander does after an action, the necessary and devastating accounting of people. Then he picked up his radio and called it in. And in his report, in the official recorded timestamp report, that would be reviewed by people above Colonel Hale, above this base, above this operational theater, he included a specific line that he had chosen his words for carefully, that he had decided on while he was still running through the kill zone, with fire coming down from ridge lines that were being systematically silenced by someone 3,000 meters away. The line read, unauthorized suppression fire from northern observation post prevented total convoy loss. Identity of shooter unknown at time of report. Assessment without external interdiction, convoy would not have survived. He put his name on it, his rank, his signature. Then he looked north one more time and said nothing else. The MPs were waiting for her at the base of the tower. 2 of them. A staff sergeant named Kowalski and a corporal whose name Elena didn't catch because he didn't say. It just stood beside Kowalski with his hand near his weapon in the practice way that meant he'd been briefed that this was a serious situation and was taking that briefing seriously. They had driven up the northern track in a military police vehicle that was parked 20 meters from the tower base, and they had the particular posture of people who had been given clear orders and were committed to executing them, but were also, Elena could see, slightly uncertain about the specifics of what they were dealing with. Kowalski looked at her when she came down the ladder. He looked at the rifle she was carrying. He looked at the valley behind her where the sound of helicopters had begun, the medevac birds that had scrambled when Morgan's report came in, that were working the northern end of the corridor, now that were doing the work that should have been unnecessary if 11 days of warnings had been heard. Sergeant Hart, Kowalski said, Staff Sergeant, I need you to come with me. She handed him the rifle without being asked. He took it, and she saw something move across his face, not quite discomfort, not quite a respect, something between the two, that he kept professionally neutral. He passed the weapon to the corporal. You're being detained pending investigation, he said. Unauthorized departure from base, unauthorized weapons deployment, violation of direct orders from commanding officer. Do you understand? I understand, Elena said. Do you have anything to say? She looked at the valley one more time, at the helicopters moving over it, at the smoke that was still rising from the vehicles that had been hit before she got the gun positions down. She thought about what she wanted to say, all of it. The 11 days, the 3 briefings, the trash can, the boot, the 3 a.m. silence. She thought about saying all of it right here to Kowalski, who was just doing his job and would write down whatever she said and it would become part of a record. The guests arrived, she said, just like I told them they would. Kowalski wrote it down. Then he put his notebook away and gestured toward the vehicle, and Elena walked to it without being told twice. The drive back to base took 37 minutes. Nobody spoke. Elena sat in the back seat and watched the terrain move past the window and controlled her breathing and thought about nothing except the math. She had already done the math of what happened next, the sequence of it, the charges that would be filed, and the board that would convene, and the career that was almost certainly already over in every way that mattered. She had known all of this when she left. She had done it anyway. She was not second-guessing it. What surprised her was how completely she was not second-guessing it. Colonel Hale was in the command post when they brought her in. He was standing at the central planning table with Major Chen beside him and 2 other officers Elena didn't know well, and the room had the specific charged atmosphere of a place where people are managing a crisis and are angry about having to manage it. Hale looked up when Kowalski brought her through the door, and the look on his face was something Elena filed away without reacting to it, was the look of a man who was furious, but whose fury had a particular quality to it, a brittleness at the edges that she recognized as something more complicated than simple anger. He was furious because she had been right, and being right was the one thing he could not absorb. Sergeant Hart, his voice was controlled, very controlled, the kind of controlled that costs something to maintain. Sir, do you understand what you've done? I understand what I did, sir, yes. You violated a direct order. You left this base without authorization. You deployed a weapon without authorization in an active operational area. You could have created a friendly fire incident. You could have compromised the operation. You could have Sir. Her voice was quiet, not disrespectful, but firm in a way that stopped him. With respect, the operation was already compromised. It was compromised before the convoy left this base. I warned you of that. I warned Major Chen. I warned your aide at 3 in the morning with an activation signal that confirmed the ambush was live. She paused one beat. The operation was not compromised by what I did today. It was saved by it. The room went very still. Hale's jaw tightened. She could see the muscles in it from across the table. You are not in a position to make that assessment. I am the only person in this room who was there, sir. Another silence. Longer this time. Major Chen was looking at the table. The 2 officers Elena didn't know were looking at Hale. Kowalski was standing near the door, doing a very professional job of appearing to be furniture. Detain her, Hale said. Separate quarters. No communications. I want charges drafted within the hour. Elena didn't say anything else. She let Kowalski take her arm gently, because Kowalski was that kind of man, and she walked out of the command post with her head level and her breathing steady and the particular internal quiet of someone who has already played out every version of what comes next and has made their peace with all of them. She was put in a small room that was used for various administrative purposes and was at this moment functioning as a holding space. There was a chair and a table and a window that looked out at the motor pool. She sat in the chair and looked at the window and waited. She waited for 40 minutes before the door opened again. It wasn't Kowalski, it was Vasquez. He came in fast, closed the door behind him, and stood looking at her with an expression that cycled through relief and anger, and something that might have been awe in about 3 seconds flat. You're okay, he said. I'm detained. You're okay, he repeated as if the distinction didn't matter, and sat down on the edge of the table. Elena, the convoy, do you know? I know what I saw. The casualty reports are coming in. His voice dropped. 14 wounded, 3 critical, 2 KIA. He stopped. But the whole unit, Morgan's confirmed the full count. 478 Marines came back out of that valley. She absorbed that. 2 killed in action. In the minutes before she reached the tower, before she got the machine guns down, before the geometry of the kill zone had been disrupted. 2 people who might have lived if the convoy had been delayed, rerouted, stopped entirely. 2 people who might have lived if anyone had listened 11 days ago. She didn't say any of that. She sat with it. The report Morgan filed, Vasquez said. It's already moved up the chain. It went over Hale's head. Morgan filed it directly through operational channels because the convoy was a multi-unit asset, and Hale isn't the sole reporting authority for it. There are people reading it right now who are not Colonel Hale. Elena looked at him. How do you know that? Because Chen told me. He hesitated. Off the record. She found me at the comms tent. She wanted me to know. Something moved through Elena that she didn't fully identify. Chen, who had said, I'll make sure the colonel is aware, and had the shame shout across her face. Chen, who apparently had been carrying something for the last 12 hours and had decided in the aftermath to put part of it down. James, she said, you need to go back to your station. You don't need to be in this room right now. I'm not leaving you in here alone. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm telling you that whatever happens next, you are not part of it. You did your job. You covered my station. You passed on what you heard. That's all you did. She looked at him steadily. Go back to work. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up. Then he sat back down again. They're saying Hale wants a court-martial. I know. Elena, a court-martial. I know what a court-martial is, James. Your career was already over when I drove through that gate, she said. I knew that. I went anyway. She looked at him, and I'd do it again. He sat with that. Then he stood up again, and this time he went to the door, and this time he opened it. He stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back at her. For what it's worth, he said, you were right about all of it, every single piece of it. I know, she said. He left. She sat alone in the room with the window and the view of the motor pool, and the distant sound of helicopters still working the valley corridor. And she thought about two people who hadn't made it out, and she sat with the weight of that in the specific way that people sit with the weight of things they cannot change and will not stop feeling. She was still sitting there when the door opened again 40 minutes later, and the person who walked through it was not Kowalski and was not Vasquez. It was Lieutenant Daniel Morgan. He came in without knocking, not because he was rude, but because he was a man who had just driven through a kill zone and was operating on a frequency that had stripped away certain social formalities. He was still in his combat gear. There was dust on his face and something dark on his left sleeve that Elena didn't look at directly. He looked like a man who had been moving continuously for the last several hours and had just now in this room stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 10 seconds. Then Morgan said, "It was you." "Yes, sir. The tower, the suppression fire. You took down the machine gun positions." "Yes, sir." "And the RPG teams." "Yes, and the snipers." 4 positions, 3 confirmed, neutralized, 1 probable. He absorbed that. He pulled the other chair out from under the table and sat down in it, and for a moment he looked like a man setting down something very heavy, not just the gear, but the weight of the last 4 hours, the weight of the valley, the weight of what almost happened and what actually happened, and the gap between those 2 things. "I want to ask you something," and he said, "Sir, when you drove out of this base this morning, before sunrise, you knew what it was going to cost you." It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. "Yes." "And you went anyway?" "Yes." "Why?" He said it simply, not rhetorically. He genuinely wanted to know. Elena thought about how to answer that. She had thought about a lot of things sitting in this room for the last couple of hours, but she hadn't thought about how to answer that question because it had never seemed like a question to her. It had always seemed like the only available answer to a different question entirely. "Because I could see it," she said. "I could see exactly what was going to happen to your convoy. I had 11 days of data telling me precisely how it was going to unfold. The positions, the timing, the geometry of the kill zone, I had all of them. All of it. And nobody with the authority to stop it was going to stop it." She paused. "I couldn't unsee what I saw. I couldn't go back to my station and monitor frequencies while 480 people drove into something I had already mapped." She looked at him. "Could you?" Morgan was quiet. "No," he said. "I couldn't." The door opened. Kowalski again this time with the look of a man receiving competing instructions from multiple directions and navigating it carefully. He looked at Morgan, looked at Elena, looked back at Morgan. "Lieutenant, sir, the colonel is requesting that—" "I'm aware of what the colonel is requesting," Morgan said without looking away from Elena. Tell him I'll be there shortly. Kowalski hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then he closed the door. Morgan stood up. He straightened his gear in the automatic way of someone whose body had been trained to present itself correctly regardless of what the mind was doing. He looked at Elena. I filed a report, he said. Full account. Tactical assessment of the engagement sequence of events. Analysis of the suppression fire from the northern position. It went up the chain this morning. I heard. It says what happened, specifically and completely. His voice was very even. It says that without external interdiction from an unauthorized position, the convoy would not have survived. Elena looked at him. That's going to create problems for you, sir. Maybe. He moved to the door. Maybe it'll create a different kind of problem for someone else. He stopped with his hand on the door the same way Vasquez had. She noticed the same unconscious pause of people who wanted to say one more thing. Sergeant Hart, what you did today, the intelligence work, all 11 days of it, and then what you did in that tower, that was the best piece of combined analysis and direct action I have ever seen in 7 months in this theater. He said it plainly without decoration. I'm going to make sure that's on the record. He left. Elena sat back down. She was not a person who cried easily or often. She had built over 4 years of service, a professional exterior that she wore with real commitment, not because she was cold, but because she had learned early that in environments where people were already looking for reasons to dismiss her, anything that looked like emotion became ammunition. She had learned to keep the exterior clean and let everything process somewhere internal, somewhere private. She sat in the room alone and let it process, the 2 KIA, the 14 wounded, the machine guns that had been firing for 90 seconds before she got the first one down, 90 seconds that she had not been able to prevent because she had needed 40 minutes to reach the tower and could not have reached it sooner. She thought about those 90 seconds. She would think about them she already knew for a very long time. She thought about Hale's face in the command post, the brittleness at the edges of his fury. She thought about Chen finding Vasquez and saying something she couldn't say to Elena directly. She thought about Morgan's report moving up the chain to people who were not Colonel Richard Hale. She was still thinking about all of it when the door opened a third time and the person who came through it was Major Patricia Chen. Chen closed the door. She stood with her back to it for a moment, and her face had none of the careful professional neutrality that Elena had seen in their previous conversations. She looked like a woman who had been through something and had come out the other side of it, changed in a way that hadn't finished settling yet. I owe you an apology, Chen said. Elena said nothing. I believed you. Chen's voice was quiet and direct and carried the specific weight of words that had been held back for too long. I want you to know that when you brought me the updated intercepts, I believed you. The analysis was sound, the terrain overlay was accurate. The signal pattern was exactly what you said it was. She stopped. And I sent you away anyway. Yes, ma'am, you did. Because the political cost of acting on it. I know why you did it, Elena said. Not forgiving it, not excusing it, just naming it accurately the way she named everything precisely and without decoration. Chen looked at her. There are people above Colonel Hale who are now reading Morgan's report. And there are people above them who have been notified. The engagement is going to be reviewed at a level significantly above this base. She paused. Your intelligence package, the full 11 days, is being requested as part of that review. Elena's mind moved fast. Hale's charges are still filed. I can't tell you they're going away. What I can tell you is that the context in which they will be reviewed has changed significantly in the last 4 hours. Chen moved to the table and sat down in the chair Morgan had occupied 20 minutes earlier, and she looked at Elena with an expression that had moved past professional and into something more human. I should have gone to bat for you when you brought me that folder. I should have pushed harder. Yes, Elena said, you should have. Chen absorbed that. I know. But you're here now, Elena said. So tell me what's actually happening. Chen leaned forward. What's happening is that a convoy of 480 Marines walked into a confirmed enemy ambush on a route that had been assessed as clear. And the only reason it wasn't a catastrophic mass casualty event is that a 26-year-old communications specialist drove out of this base before sunrise and spent 40 minutes in an observation tower doing alone what 3 machine gun positions, 2 RPG teams, and 4 sniper positions were trying to prevent. She paused. And every officer who dismissed her warnings is now trying to figure out how that's going to look when it's laid out in a formal review. Elena looked at the window, the motor pool, the ordinary machinery of a base continuing to function. "How does Hale look?" she said. "Not good," Chen said quietly. "The trash can, Elena. Someone saw that. Someone always sees things like that." In 3 documented briefings that he dismissed 3 with a 4th turned away at his door at 0300 hours. That's a pattern that's going to be very difficult to explain to a review board. Something cold moved through Elena. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Something more complicated and less clean than either of those things. Because 2 men were dead, and satisfaction and vindication had no place in the same room with that. "I don't want him destroyed," she said, quietly, meaning it. Chen looked at her with something that might have been surprise. "He made a bad call," Elena said. "He let 30 years of experience convince him that someone outside his established hierarchy couldn't see something he couldn't. That's a human failing. I understand it. I don't excuse it, but I understand it." She stopped. "2 of his Marines are dead because of it. I think he's going to carry that. I think that's enough." Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You're more generous than I would be." "I'm not generous," Elena said. "I'm tired." She looked at Chen. "I've been awake for 26 hours, and I've spent 11 days being told I was wrong about something I was completely right about. And I drove into the desert before sunrise, and I sat in a tower for 40 minutes, and I did what I did. And now I'm sitting in this room, waiting to find out if I'm going to be court-martialed for it." Her voice stayed level through all of it. "I don't have the energy for anything except the truth right now. And the truth is that what happened today was a system failure. Not just one man, a system that decided before I opened my mouth what I was and what I wasn't worth listening to." Chen looked at her for a long moment. Then she stood up. "The review board," she said, "when it convenes, and it will convene, you are going to need to be prepared to walk them through everything. Every intercept, every analysis, every briefing, and every response to it." She moved to the door. "I'll be there. As a witness." She paused. "For the record." She left. Elena sat in the room as the light through the window changed the morning moving into afternoon. The base sounds shifting with it. The helicopters finally going quiet as the valley work completed. She sat with the 2 names she didn't yet know, the 2 Marines who had not come out of the valley, and she held them with the specific private weight of someone who will carry names they were never supposed to have to carry. She heard voices outside. Not the routine base voices she had been filtering out for 2 hours, but a different kind. Multiple people moving together with an energy that penetrated the door in a way that made her lift her head. The door opened. Kowalski again. His face was doing something she hadn't seen on it before. Something that wasn't quite the careful, professional, neutral, something that had shifted. "Sergeant Hart," he said, "you need to come with me." "Am I being moved to formal detention?" He paused. "You need to come with me," he said again. And then quietly, almost despite himself, "There are Marines outside." She stood up. She followed him to the door through the corridor out into the flat afternoon light of the base compound. And she stopped. There were Marines outside, not 2 or 3, not a small gathering, a significant number of them men in still dusty combat gear who had come directly from the valley, from the medevac staging area, from the debrief tents standing in the compound outside the building where she had been held. They were not organized. They were not in formation. They were just there, in the loose clustering of people who have arrived at a place because they needed to be at that place and have not been told how to arrange themselves. They were Morgan's Marines. Some of them she recognized. Most of them she didn't. They were all looking at her. Nobody said anything for a moment. The compound was very quiet in the way that a space with many people in it can sometimes be quiet when the thing that everyone is feeling is large enough to press sound out of the air. Then from somewhere in the middle of the group, someone began to clap. Not the performative clapping of a ceremony, the specific, deliberate, repeated clapping of someone who means it with their hands. And then another person joined, and another. Elena stood in the afternoon light and looked at the faces of people who had been in a valley that morning and were alive because of 11 days of work that nobody had wanted to hear. And she did not cry. She had told herself she would not cry. She was not going to cry in the compound in front of 400 Marines. She almost didn't make it. From across the compound, Colonel Richard Hale watched through the window of the command post. He watched the Marines in the compound. He watched Elena Hart standing among them. He watched what was happening with the face of a man watching the specific collapse of a version of events he had been trying to maintain, watching it come apart, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet, irresistible weight of what was simply undeniably true. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he turned away from it, and somewhere above the base in offices that were not on this compound and communications that had been moving since Morgan's report cleared the first relay point, people with significantly more authority than Colonel Richard Hale were already asking questions. The answers to those questions were going to change everything. They just didn't know it yet. The charges were formal by 1800 hours. Kowalski delivered them personally, which Elena had come to understand was his way of showing a kind of respect. Not doing things through intermediaries when he could do them directly, not letting bureaucratic distance substitute for human accountability. He sat across from her at the table in the room. She had been moved to a slightly larger space, still administrative, still functionally a holding area, and he read the charges in a voice that was careful and even, and completely without editorial comment. Unauthorized absence from duty station. Unauthorized removal of government property. Specifically 1M11, semi-automatic sniper system from the base armory. Unauthorized departure from forward operating base Sentinel during an active operational period. Unauthorized engagement of enemy forces without command authorization. Violation of direct orders from a superior officer, specifically Colonel Richard Hale, on 3 documented occasions within a 72-hour period. He put the paper down when he finished. "Do you understand the charges as read?" he said. "Yes," Elena said. "Do you have anything to say for the record at this time?" She thought about it. "No." He nodded. He picked up the paper. He stood. And then he did something she didn't expect. He extended his hand across the table. She looked at it for a moment, then shook it. His grip was firm and brief. "Off the record," he said quietly. "My brother was in Fallujah. He came home because someone made a call that wasn't in the playbook." He picked up his folder. "On the record, you have the right to request legal representation, and you should do so immediately." He left. She sat alone with the charges written on paper in front of her and thought about what they meant. Not abstractly, not legally, but in the specific and concrete terms of a life. 4 years of service. A career she had built with precision and commitment in an environment that had made building it twice as hard as it should have been. The clearances, the skills, the 11 days of work that had been more accurate than anything produced by the formal intelligence cell attached to this base. All of it now sitting on one side of a scale and on the other side a paper that said she had broken the rules. She had broken the rules. She was not going to pretend she hadn't. She had driven through that gate knowing exactly what she was doing and what it would cost, and she had done it anyway, and the calculus of that decision remained exactly what it had been at 4:30 in the morning when she made it. She did not regret it. She would not perform regret she didn't feel. Whatever happened next, it would happen to a person who had looked at 480 names and chosen them over her own career. And she could live with that person in a way she could not have lived with the alternative. What she hadn't anticipated was what happened at 1900 hours. The door opened, and a man she had never seen before walked in. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, wearing the rank of brigadier general, with the particular ease of someone who had worn it long enough that it had become invisible to him. He had a face that had processed a very large number of difficult things over a long career, and had arrived through that processing at a specific kind of calm that was not coldness, but something more like clarity. He sat down across from her. "Sergeant Hart," he said, "I'm General William Carver. I'm the operational commander for this theater. I flew in from the regional command post 2 hours ago." He put his hands flat on the table. "I want to hear everything, from the beginning, in your own words. Take as long as you need." Elena looked at him. She had learned over 4 years to read the specific quality of attention that people gave her, the conditional attention, the skeptical attention, the performatively polite attention that was already constructing its dismissal while she was still talking. She looked at Carver's face and she did not see any of those things. She saw someone listening. She started talking. She talked for 47 minutes without interruption. She walked him through the initial pattern identification, the 11 days of intercept analysis, the terrain mapping the 3 formal briefings and their outcomes, the updated intercepts, the activation signal at 2:47 in the morning, the drive north, the tower, the 40 minutes. She was precise and chronological, and she cited specific data points from memory with the accuracy of someone who had lived inside this material for long enough that it had become structural part of the architecture of how she thought, not just information she had stored. Carver asked 3 questions during the 47 minutes. All 3 were technical. All 3 were the questions of someone who understood signals intelligence well enough to probe the methodology rather than just assess the conclusions. When she answered them, his expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted very slightly, settling the way a person settles when what they're hearing confirms what they already suspected. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The charges Colonel Hale filed," he said. "You understand I can't make those disappear unilaterally." "Yes, sir." "There will be a formal review. The process has to run." He looked at her steadily. "But I want you to understand something. The review will include Colonel Hale's decision-making, the 3 briefings, the documented dismissals, the 3 a.m. refusal." He paused. "It will include Major Chen's testimony, which she has already volunteered. It will include Lieutenant Morgan's report, which is the most clearly written tactical assessment I have read in 18 months. And it will include your intelligence package, which my staff has been analyzing since this afternoon." He stopped again. "Your methodology was sound. Your conclusions were accurate. Your threat assessment was correct in every material particular." Elena held very still. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "I know." Something moved across Carver's face, not quite a smile. Something more like recognition, the specific recognition of a person encountering someone who is telling the truth about themselves without either false modesty or overreach. "You're not surprised by that assessment," he said. "No, sir, I've known for 11 days. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up. "The review board convenes in 72 hours. I'll be chairing it personally." He picked up the folder he had brought in with him. "Get some sleep, Sergeant, and get legal representation. What happens in the next 3 days is going to matter for a long time." He left. Elena sat alone in the room and let out a slow breath. Something had shifted. She could feel it the way she could feel shifts in signals patterns, not in any single dramatic element, but in the aggregate, in the accumulation of small indicators that together formed an undeniable picture. Carver's presence, Chen's volunteer testimony, Morgan's report, the Marines in the compound, the weight of all of it on one side of the scale against the paper with the charges on it. Something had shifted. She was still figuring out what it meant when the door opened again, and Vasquez came in with food he had brought from the mess tent and a look on his face that said he had been waiting for a gap in the official traffic to get to her and had finally found one. He put the food on the table and sat down and looked at her. "Carver," he said, "you knew he was here. Everyone knows he's here." He landed in the command post and went straight into a meeting with Hale that lasted 22 minutes, and when it was over, Hale looked like a man who'd been told the earth was moving under him. Vasquez paused. "What did they talk about? Do you know?" "I can guess," Elena said. She picked up the food. She realized, extremely hungry, the kind of hunger that comes from sustained physical and mental expenditure and gets ignored until it suddenly can't be anymore. "Carver's chairing the review board personally." Vasquez was quiet for a moment. "That's not standard." "No, it's not. That means he thinks this is serious enough to handle himself." "Yes." "Elena." He leaned forward. "I need to tell you something. While you were in with Carver, there was a call from the families. 3 of the Marines in Morgan's convoy, their families had apparently been notified of a potential mass casualty event from someone inside the base leaking preliminary reports. The families called their congressman." He stopped. 2 congressional offices have already contacted the regional command post asking for information about the engagement and the intelligence that preceded it. Elena put down the food. She looked at him. "Congressional." "Yeah." The scale shifted again, not subtly this time. She could feel the specific weight of institutional attention, the kind that moved slower than combat and hit harder than any weapon she had ever held. Congressional inquiry meant record requests. It meant testimony. It meant the 11 days of dismissed intelligence briefings becoming a matter of public record in a way that Colonel Richard Hale could not manage or contain. "James," she said carefully, "who leaked the preliminary casualty reports." He met her eyes. He didn't say anything. "James?" "I don't know anything about that," he said. His voice was very even. "I was at my monitoring station all afternoon." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her food again. "Okay," she said. They sat together for 20 minutes without saying much, which was its own kind of conversation, the kind between people who have been through something together and don't need words to acknowledge it. When Vasquez left, he squeezed her shoulder once briefly, and she let him, which was more than she would normally allow. The night was long. She slept in short intervals on a cot that had been brought in, waking regularly with the particular alertness of someone whose nervous system had not yet been convinced that the crisis was over. In the quiet hours, she thought about the two Marines who had not come out of the valley. She had gotten their names from Vasquez before he left. Corporal Aaron Jeffries, 23, from Savannah, Georgia. Lance Corporal Miguel Santos, 21, from El Paso. She held the names carefully, the way you hold things that are irreversible. She thought about 90 seconds, the time it had taken her to neutralize the first machine gun position after the ambush opened. 90 seconds during which those two young men and 12 others who had been wounded had been exposed to the full force of the ambush geometry. 90 seconds she could not have reduced without the authorization that would have had her in that tower 3 hours earlier, all positioned and ready instead of driving in the dark trying to reach it in time. She thought about that 90 seconds for a long time. At 0600 the next morning, she was informed that her legal representation had arrived a JAG officer named Captain Sarah Ewan, who had driven through the night from the regional legal office and came in looking alert in the specific way of someone running on coffee and professional urgency. Ewan sat down, opened a notepad, and looked at Elena with eyes that were direct and very sharp. "I've read the charges, and I've read Morgan's report," Ewan said. "I want to be clear with you about something before we go further. I'm here to represent your interests, which means I need you to be completely honest with me about everything. Not the version you'd tell a review board, everything." "The version I'd tell a review board is everything," Elena said. "I don't have another version." Ewan looked at her for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Good. Then let's talk about the charges." They talked for 3 hours. Ewan was methodical and incisive, and she asked questions that cut directly to the structural vulnerabilities of the charges. The 3 documented briefings, the activation signal, the recorded gate departure time, relative to the convoy departure time, the documented evidence that Elena had exhausted every available official channel before taking unilateral action. She built a framework with the precision of someone who had done this before, who understood how review boards thought and what they weighted and where the arguments needed to be strongest. At one point, she stopped and looked at Elena directly. "The charges are real," she said. "You did violate orders. That's not in dispute, and we're not going to argue otherwise. What we're going to argue is the context, the necessity, and the demonstrated consequences, meaning that the outcome of your unauthorized action was the preservation of 478 lives that the authorized command structure was in the process of delivering into a confirmed kill zone." She paused. "That's a powerful argument, but it depends on the review board being willing to weigh necessity against procedure, and that depends significantly on General Carver." "I think Carver's going to be fair," Elena said. "Why, boss?" "Because he asked the right questions." She thought about the 3 technical questions, precise, methodologically informed, the questions of someone who had understood signals intelligence before he ever walked into that room. He already knew what he was looking at. He came to verify, not to assess. Ewan considered that. "That's a significant read." "I'm good at reading signals," Elena said simply. Ewan almost smiled. "Yes, I've gathered that." The review board convened at 1400 hours, 32 hours after the convoy cleared the northern end of the valley. It was held in the main briefing room of the command post, the same room where 11 days ago, Elena had given her first formal briefing to Colonel Hale and watched him decide she wasn't worth his full attention. The same maps were on the walls, the same table, everything functionally identical except for who was sitting at it and what was at stake. Carver sat at the head. Beside him were 2 other senior officers. Elena didn't know a colonel from the regional legal office and a lieutenant colonel who had been introduced as the theater intelligence officer. Hale was present, seated to one side with his own legal representation. Chen was there. Morgan was there, still in duty uniform, sitting very straight with his hands on the table in front of him. Elena sat across from Carver with Ewan beside her. The room was very quiet. Carver opened the proceedings without preamble. He stated the charges. He stated the framework for the review. He stated that the board was empowered to make recommendations including dismissal of charges, reduction of charges, or referral to formal court-martial proceedings. His voice was neutral and procedural and gave away nothing. Then he said, "We will begin with Sergeant Hart's intelligence timeline. Sergeant, please walk this board through your analysis from initial pattern identification through the final activation signal, complete and unabridged." Elena walked them through it. She had done this enough times in the last 48 hours that the story had achieved a kind of crystalline quality not rehearsed in the sense of performance, but refined in the sense of absolute clarity. Every data point in its right place, every analytical step explained, every official channel documented with dates, times, and recorded outcomes. She was precise and she was thorough, and she was completely without affect, not because she felt nothing, but because she had learned that in rooms like this one, the most powerful thing she could offer was the work itself unadorned. When she reached the activation signal, the room had gone very still. The theater intelligence officer, the lieutenant colonel, leaned forward. "The phrase you translated as confirming active operational status. Walk me through the translation specifically." She did. He asked 2 follow-up questions. His face, which had been carefully neutral throughout, shifted very slightly as she answered them. She saw him look at Carver. Carver did not look back at him, but something in his posture registered the look. Then Morgan testified. He was direct and factual, and he described the convoy engagement with the spare precision of someone who had written and rewritten the tactical sequence in his own mind until every element was perfectly sequenced. He described the ambush geometry. He described the reduction of the machine gun positions. He described his real-time assessment that external interdiction was occurring and his decision to order the convoy push based on that assessment. He described reaching the northern end of the valley and understanding what had happened. Then the board's counsel asked him a question that went very quiet in the room. "Lieutenant Morgan, in your assessment, if the external suppression fire from the northern observation post had not occurred, what would the outcome of the engagement have been?" Morgan looked directly at Carver. "Total convoy loss," he said. "In my assessment, there would have been no survivors." The room absorbed that. No survivors. 480 Marines, total convoy loss. Hale was very still across the room. Elena did not look at him directly, but she was aware of him with the peripheral awareness of someone who has learned to track things without appearing to. Chen testified next. She was precise and she was honest, and she said the words Elena had never expected to hear her say in an official proceeding, that she had believed Elena's analysis, that she had assessed it as credible, and that she had chosen not to act on it because of what she described as institutional and political pressure to maintain the convoy schedule. She said it plainly without qualification, and she did not look away from the board while she said it. It was the most important testimony of the day, and everyone in the room knew it. Then Carver asked a question that no one had expected. He looked at Hale directly the first time he had addressed him during the proceedings and said, "Colonel Hale, in the briefing on the morning of the convoy departure, you were presented with an intelligence package that Sergeant Hart had prepared. What happened to that package?" Hale's legal representative shifted slightly. Hale looked at Carver. "I determined that the analysis did not meet the threshold for operational disruption." "That's not what I asked," Carver said. His voice was still perfectly level. "What happened to the physical package, the printed documents?" A silence. It was not a long silence. It was a very specific kind of silence, the kind that precedes something irreversible. "I disposed of it," Hale said. "Disposed of it how?" Another silence, shorter this time. Hale was a man who had been in the military for 30 years, and he understood with 30 years of clarity exactly where this was going. "I dropped it in the waste bin," he said. The room went absolutely still. Carver looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at his notes. He made a small mark on the paper in front of him. He did not say anything else to Hale. He looked at Elena. "Sergeant Hart, you had exhausted every official channel available to you. You had made 4 documented attempts to deliver this intelligence through proper command structure, all of which were refused. At the point at which you made the decision to take unilateral action, what was your assessment of the alternatives?" Elena held his gaze. "My assessment was that there were no alternatives that would result in the convoy being stopped or rerouted, and that without external interdiction, the convoy would sustain catastrophic casualties." She paused. "I was the only person with both the knowledge of what was in the valley and the ability to reach a position from which I could do something about it. I chose to do something about it. Knowing what it would cost you. Yes, sir. Carver looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked around the room. Then he said, "This board will recess for deliberation." The recess lasted 1 hour and 14 minutes. Elena sat in a side room with UN, who was quiet and professional, and who Elena noticed was not expressing concern the way a lawyer expresses concern when they think an outcome is genuinely uncertain. Ewan was calm in a way that was different from practice calm. It was the calm of someone who believed they knew where this was going. When the board reconvened, Carver opened with a statement. This board finds that Sergeant Elena Hart violated orders and operational protocols. Those violations are documented and acknowledged. He paused. This board also finds that those violations occurred in a context of systemic intelligence failure at the command level, in which credible and accurate threat assessment was repeatedly disregarded, and that the outcome of Sergeant Hart's unauthorized action was the preservation of 478 lives. He looked up from the paper. The board recommends dismissal of all charges pending review of command-level decisions by appropriate higher authority. Sergeant Hart is to be released from detention immediately. He kept reading. Additionally, this board recommends that Sergeant Hart's intelligence methodology and tactical assessment be formally documented and submitted to the Theater Intelligence Command as a model for signals-based threat analysis. He paused again, and his voice changed very slightly, not dramatically, but enough. And this board recommends that Sergeant Hart be considered for immediate referral to the Scout Sniper Training Program, pending her agreement and a full assessment of demonstrated capabilities. The room made a sound, not loud, just a collective exhale of people who had been holding something. Elena sat very still. Scout Sniper Training Program. She had heard the words, but they had not yet resolved into meaning. They were a different world from where she was sitting, a world that she had never aimed for, because it had never been available to her, because the path to it ran through doors that had never been opened in her direction. Ewan put a hand on her arm briefly, a single point of contact. Then she removed it. Carver looked directly at Elena. "Sergeant Hart, do you understand the board's findings?" "Yes, sir," she said. Her voice was steady. "Do you have anything to say?" She thought about it. She thought about 11 days and 4 offices and a trash can and a 3 a.m. hallway and a tower and 40 minutes and 2 names she was going to carry for the rest of her life. "The 2 Marines we lost," she said. "Corporal Aaron Jeffries and Lance Corporal Miguel Santos." She held Carver's gaze. "I wanted on record that they should not have been in that valley, that the intelligence to prevent it existed and was ignored, that their families deserve to know that someone tried to stop it." Her voice did not break. "That's all I want on the record." The room was very quiet. Carver looked at her, and for the first time since he had walked into that room, something moved across his face that was unmistakably human. Something that was not procedural or professional or measured, but simply the response of one person to another person's grief and clarity. "It will be on the record," he said, "exactly as you've stated it." Across the room, Colonel Richard Hale sat very still. He had been still for most of the proceedings, the stillness of a man who is watching something collapse and has understood at some point during the collapse that there is nothing he can do about it. He was looking at the table in front of him. He was not looking at Elena. He was not looking at Carver. He was looking at the table with the expression of a man doing a private accounting that was going to take a long time to complete. Elena looked at him once, just once directly. He didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't react. She looked at the lines in his face, 30 years of decisions carried there. She thought about what she had said to Chen. "He's going to carry it. That's enough." She looked away. Morgan caught her eye across the room. He didn't smile. The occasion didn't call for it. He just held her gaze for a moment with an expression that she understood without needing to translate. She nodded once. He nodded back. Outside the command post, Vasquez was waiting. He had been there for 2 hours, she would later learn, sitting on a concrete barrier outside the building, refusing to go back to his station, waiting for someone to come out and tell him what had happened. When Elena came through the door, he stood up, fast, read her face, and didn't need to ask. He exhaled. It was the most expressive thing she had seen him do in 4 years. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she agreed. They stood in the afternoon light of the base compound for a moment. In the distance, the northern ridgeline was visible. The valley was there beyond it, invisible from here, but present in both their minds with the specific weight of places where something irrevocable has happened. The helicopters had stopped. The base had returned to its operational rhythms. The machinery of it continued. Scout Sniper Program, Vasquez said. Not a question. Just naming it the way you name something you are still processing. If I accept. He looked at her. Are you going to? Elena looked at the ridgeline. She thought about the tower. She thought about the math, the angles and distances, and the cold precision of it, the way it had felt not alien, but exactly like the thing she had always been doing, just with different variables. She thought about what she was and what she had found out she was capable of, and whether those two things were the same or different. Yes, she said, I think I am. The acceptance form for Scout Sniper training sat on the table in front of Elena for 2 days before she signed it. Not because she was uncertain. She had told Vasquez yes the moment he asked, and she had meant it without reservation. The 2 days were not hesitation, they were something else entirely, something she had trouble naming at first, and then gradually understood. She was waiting to feel like herself again. The person who had driven north before sunrise, who had climbed a tower and worked a rifle for 40 minutes, and then sat in a holding room and faced a review board and said the names of 2 dead Marines into an official record, that person was her completely and without qualification, but she needed a few days to let that person settle back into the life that preceded her. On the morning of the second day, Vasquez brought her coffee and sat across from her at the small table in the comms tent and looked at the unsigned form between them. You know what I think, he said. You're going to tell me anyway. I think you've been waiting to feel like you deserved it. She looked at him. He was 22 years old, and sometimes he said things that landed with a precision that had nothing to do with age. That's not, she started. Elena, she stopped. You saved 478 people, he said. You were right about everything was sitting. You tried every official channel 4 times. You went out there alone when no one else would. And you've been sitting in this tent for 2 days looking at a form that offers you exactly the career path your actual demonstrated abilities point to. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. What exactly are you waiting to deserve? She looked at the form. She picked up the pen. She signed it. Vasquez exhaled. Finally, she put the pen down and looked at him. You're insufferable. You're welcome, he said. The form went up the chain the same afternoon. What came back down was faster than she expected. Approvals moved with an efficiency that told her Carver had cleared a path before she even submitted the paperwork. She was scheduled to depart for the training program in 11 days. 11 days, the same number she had spent building the intelligence package that had started all of this, which she noticed and chose not to read as meaningful, and then noticed herself noticing, and decided it was at least a little bit meaningful. But before any of that, there was one more thing that needed to happen. She had known it was coming since the review board. Carver had told her quietly as the proceedings concluded that Colonel Hale had requested a meeting with her. Not an official meeting, nothing on the record, nothing formal, nothing that would appear in any documentation. A personal meeting, Hale's request, Hale's initiative, and Elena's complete freedom to decline it. She had not declined it. The meeting was set for the following morning at 0800 in a small conference room that nobody used for anything important, a space at the edge of the command post that had the specific anonymity of rooms designated for conversations that needed to not be overheard. Elena arrived first. She sat down and waited. Hale came in at exactly 0800. He was in uniform because Richard Hale was always in uniform, but something about the way he wore it had changed, not visibly. Not in any way another person walking past would notice, but Elena noticed it. The authority that he had always carried in his body like a second skeleton was still there, but it was carrying something else now. Something heavier, something that had no rank insignia and couldn't be set down at the end of a duty day. He sat down across from her. He did not have anything with him, no folder, no notes, nothing to occupy his hands or give him something to reference. Just himself across a table from a 26-year-old sergeant he had dismissed 4 times in 3 days. He was quiet for a moment. I don't do this easily, he said. I want you to know that. Not because I think it makes it more meaningful, it probably makes it worse, actually. But I want you to know it's real. Elena waited. I was wrong, he said, about the intelligence, about you, about the weight I gave to your analysis versus what I gave to my own certainty. He said it flatly without the softening language that people often use when they're apologizing for something large. No qualifiers, no context, just the statement sitting in the air between them. I dropped your report in the trash. I had you turned away at 0300 hours, and 2 men are dead who might not be dead if I had listened. He stopped. His jaw was working slightly, the way it does when a person is keeping something controlled that does not want to be controlled. I will carry that for the rest of my life. I want you to know I understand what I did. Elena looked at him. She had thought about this conversation many times in the last 2 days, what she would say, how she would respond, whether she would be generous or honest or both, and whether those things would conflict. She had rehearsed several versions of it in her head, and none of them had felt right because all of them had felt too clean, too resolved, too much like the ending of a story rather than a moment in an actual life. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. When I came to you the first time, the first briefing, before any of the decisions were made, what did you actually think when you looked at what I brought you? Hale was quiet for a long moment. It was the kind of quiet that told her he was actually considering the question rather than formulating a diplomatic answer, and she respected him slightly more for it. I thought it was thorough, he said, more thorough than I expected. He paused. I thought you were young and working outside your lane and probably pattern matching on incomplete data. He looked at the table. I thought, and I'm going to say this because you asked for the truth, I thought that a communications specialist who had been in country for 7 months was not in a position to identify something that my intelligence cell in 30 years of combat experience had not flagged. He looked up. I thought my certainty was the same thing as accuracy. It wasn't, but that's what I thought. You never read it, Elena said. You looked at the first page and closed it. No, he said, I didn't read it. If you had read it, I don't know, he said. I want to say yes. I want to say that if I had read it, I would have seen what was there and made a different decision. But I can't tell you that honestly because I don't know what I would have done. I know what I should have done. I know that now. I didn't know it then because I wasn't looking. He put his hands flat on the table. That's the part I have to live with, not just the decision, the not looking. Elena looked at him. She thought about what she had told Chen, he's going to carry it, that's enough. She had meant it when she said it. She still meant it, sitting here across from him, watching him carry it in real time. I'm not going to tell you it's okay, she said, because it's not okay. 2 men are dead and 12 more have wounds they're going to feel for years, and the convoy lost 3 vehicles, and the families of Aaron Jeffries and Miguel Santos are going to get a knock on their door that is going to change their lives forever. She held his gaze. None of that is okay. No, he said, it's not. But I also don't think you're a bad man, she said. I think you're a man who lets certainty do the work that listening should have done, and I think you know the difference now. She paused. That matters. It doesn't fix anything, but it matters. Hale looked at her, and in his face she saw something she had not expected to see. Not relief, not absolution, but something more complicated and more honest than either. The face of a person being seen accurately without reduction or inflation by someone who had every reason to be less generous and had chosen not to be, not out of weakness, but out of a specific kind of strength that had nothing to do with rank. You're going to the sniper program, he said. Yes, sir. You'll be good at it. I know, she said simply. Something crossed his face that was almost a smile but wasn't quite. Yeah, he said. I know you know. He stood up. He straightened his uniform in the automatic way. He looked at her one more time. Sergeant Hart, for what it's worth, and I understand it may not be worth much, I intend to make sure that what you built over those 11 days is used. The methodology, the approach, the way you connected signal analysis to terrain mapping to operational threat assessment. I'm recommending it be incorporated into the intelligence cell's standard operating procedure. He paused. Your work should have stopped that convoy before it departed. Since it didn't, the least I can do is make sure it stops the next one. He extended his hand. She looked at it. She thought about a trash can. She thought about a boot on 11 days of work. She thought about the 3 a.m. hallway and the silence from behind a door. She thought about Corporal Aaron Jeffries and Lance Corporal Miguel Santos, 23 and 21 from Savannah and El Paso, who were not going to have a next one. She shook his hand. He left. She sat alone in the room for a few minutes, not thinking about anything in particular, just letting the quiet sit with her. Then she got up and went back to work. The next 11 days had a different quality from anything that had preceded them. The base knew what had happened, not the official version, not the documented version, but the version that moves through a military installation, the way all real information moves person to person, detail, accumulating truth, crystallizing in the telling. People looked at Elena differently. Not all of them with warmth. There were those who thought she had broken the chain of command in a way that couldn't be excused regardless of outcome, and she respected their consistency even when she disagreed with it. But most of them looked at her with something that was harder to categorize and more significant than admiration. They looked at her the way people look at someone who has confirmed something they needed to believe was possible. Morgan came to find her on the fourth day. He came to the communications tent in the early afternoon and stood in the doorway with the particular posture of someone who has thought carefully about whether to be here and has decided to be here anyway. Vasquez looked up, read the situation, and found somewhere else to be with impressive efficiency. Morgan sat down. He had a folder with him, thin official looking, the kind that comes from a command-level office rather than an administrative desk. "My official after-action report," he said. "The final version. Command approved it this morning." He put it on the table but didn't push it toward her. "I want to read you one section, if that's okay." "Okay," Elena said. He opened it. He found the page. He read, "The preservation of this convoy and the survival of 478 personnel is attributable, in its entirety, to the accuracy of intelligence analysis developed independently by Sergeant Elena Hart over an 11-day period preceding the engagement, and to her decision, absent any authorization and at significant personal cost, to act on that intelligence when no authorized party would do so. The United States Marine Corps owes this outcome to a 26-year-old communications specialist who was told repeatedly that she didn't know what she was talking about and who was right every single time." He closed the folder, so in that folder. The tent was very quiet. "I want you to know that's in the official record," he said. "Permanently. Not in a supplementary note, not in an addendum. In the body of the primary after-action report on the first page in the summary section that every commanding officer in this theater is required to read." Elena looked at the folder. She thought about another folder, hers, the one she had carried into 3 offices over 11 days, the one that had been dropped in a trash can and stepped on and turned away at 3 in the morning. She thought about the distance between that folder and this one. "Thank you," she said. It was not a large thing to say. It was exactly the right size. "Don't thank me," Morgan said. "It's accurate. Accurate is all it is." He stood up to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. The 2 men we lost. Jeffries and Santos." He stopped again, collecting something. "I've been in contact with their families. I told them the truth that there was someone who tried to prevent it, who fought through every channel she had, and then went beyond those channels at the cost of her career to do everything a person could do." His voice was steady but carrying weight. "Santos's mother, she wants to write to you, if you're willing to receive the letter." Elena absorbed that. A mother who had lost her son, wanting to write to the woman who had tried and partially failed to save him, who had saved 478 others and had not been able to save her boy. She thought about what that letter would contain and what it would take to read it. "Yes," she said, "I'll receive it." He nodded once. He left. The letter arrived 6 days later, forwarded through official channels, handwritten on plain paper in careful, deliberate script. Elena read it alone late at night, sitting at her monitoring station with the frequency analyzers running quietly around her. She read it 3 times. She folded it carefully and put it in her chest pocket, close to her body, and she left it there. She didn't tell anyone what it said. Some things are not for telling. On the 10th day, something happened that nobody had seen coming, though afterward, several people would say they should have. Carver called her into his office, not the conference room, not a formal setting, but his actual working office, where a man with the weight of an entire operational theater on his desk had chosen to make time in a schedule that didn't have extra time in it. He was standing at the window when she came in, looking out at the base with the expression of someone managing distances that had nothing to do with geography. He turned when she entered. He didn't sit down, neither did she. "I want to tell you something before you leave tomorrow," he said. "Not for the record, just between us. Sir, I've been in this business for 31 years. I have seen in those 31 years perhaps a dozen people who had the combination of analytical ability an operational instinct that you demonstrated over the last 2 weeks. He paused. I don't say that to flatter you or to soften anything. I say it because you're about to enter a training program that is going to push you harder than anything you've experienced, and you need to go into it, understanding exactly what you are, not what other people have told you you are. He held her gaze. Do you understand the distinction? Yes, sir, she said. Good. He moved to his desk and picked up a sealed envelope. He held it out to her. This is a letter of commendation signed by me going into your permanent record. It details the intelligence methodology, the tactical engagement, and the review board findings. He paused. It also details the 4 documented dismissals of your briefings by the previous chain of command. All of it, so that anyone who pulls your record in the future will read the complete picture. She took the envelope. One more thing, Carver said, and this is the one that is actually between us, Sergeant. Off the record, personal, never to be documented. He looked at her with the directness of someone who has earned the right to say hard, true things. What you did in that tower, the precision, the sequencing, the target prioritization under live conditions with no preparation and no support, that was not luck and it was not adrenaline. That was ability. Real specific, developed ability that you have been carrying around inside a job title that was never big enough for it. He stopped. The program you're going to is going to see that. Let them see it. Don't protect yourself by making yourself smaller. Go in full size. Elena looked at him. She thought about 4 years of making herself exactly the right size for rooms that didn't want her any larger. 4 years of careful calibration of precision, not just in her work, but in her presence, occupying exactly as much space as the people around her were comfortable with, no more. Yes, sir, she said. And then because Carver was a man who had specifically asked her for honesty, that's going to be harder than the program. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, but its precise predecessor. I know, he said. Do it anyway. She left his office and walked back across the base in the late afternoon light, with the sealed envelope in her hand and something moving in her chest that was not quite any single feeling, but the sum of all of them, the 11 days in the valley and the tower and the holding room and the review board and Hale across the table and Morgan reading from a folder and Santos's mother's handwriting and on plain paper folded in her chest pocket. She found Vasquez at the comms tent. He was at his station headphones on monitoring the frequencies she had taught him to watch the secondary bands, the pattern recognition methodology she had developed, the analytical approach that Hale had said he was recommending for official incorporation, and that Vasquez had already absorbed and was already using better than most people twice his age. He looked up when she came in. He saw the envelope. He saw her face. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow. He took off his headphones. He put them on the desk carefully, the way you put down something you have been trusted with. He looked at her with the expression of someone who has things to say and is choosing between them. You know what you did right, he said. Not just the valley, not just the tower, all 11 days of it. The methodology, the approach, what you built. James, no. Listen. His voice was quiet and serious in a way that was different from his usual register. I've been doing signals work for 2 years. I'm good at it, I know that. But what you built over those 11 days, the way you connected the intercepts to the terrain, to the operational assessment, that's not standard. That's not something you learn in a classroom. That's something you either have or you don't. He paused. You have it. And for 11 days, the people who were supposed to recognize it looked right at it and threw it in the trash. He held her gaze. I just want you to know that I saw it. From day one, I saw exactly what it was. Elena looked at him, 22 years old, sitting at a monitoring station in a communications tent, saying the truest thing anyone had said to her since this whole thing began. I know you did, she said. That mattered, more than you know. He nodded once. He put his headphones back on. He turned back to his station. She stood there for a moment watching him work, watching him scan the frequencies with the particular quality of attention she had taught him, patient pattern-oriented, never forcing a conclusion before the data was ready to support one. She thought he's going to be good at this, better than good. She left the tent and walked to the northern edge of the base where the perimeter fence gave way to the view of the terrain beyond it, the direction of the northern track, the ridge line, the valley that was invisible from here but present in her mind with the specific weight of places that have changed you. She stood there for a few minutes. She thought about Aaron Jeffries and Miguel Santos. She would always think about them. She had accepted that not as a burden to be managed, but as a responsibility to be honored. Their names were part of her now, the way the 11 days were part of her, the way the tower was part of her. You don't survive things cleanly. You survive them whole, which means you carry them, which means they travel forward with you into everything that comes next. She thought about Carver's words, go in full size. She thought about what that meant for a woman who had spent 4 years learning the precise dimensions of the space she was permitted to occupy. Full size. She turned it over in her mind, though, way she turned frequency patterns, looking at it from different angles, testing its edges, understanding its shape. She thought she could do it. She thought it was going to be the hardest thing she'd ever done, and she had driven alone into the desert before sunrise with a rifle and no authorization, and spent 40 minutes in a tower doing something she had never trained for, so the bar for hardest thing was not low. She went back to her quarters and packed her gear with the methodical precision that was her natural mode. Everything in its right place, nothing unnecessary, the kit of a person who has learned to carry what matters and leave the rest. She packed the letter from Santos's mother last, wrapped in a clean cloth, placed flat at the top where it wouldn't be damaged. She slept well, better than she had in weeks. In the morning, Vasquez was at the departure point. He was not supposed to be there. He was supposed to be on shift, and they both knew it, and neither of them said anything about it. Morgan was there too, which surprised her and then didn't. Reyes was there, which surprised her more, and 3 other Marines from the convoy, whose names she had learned in the days since the valley. Men who had been in the kill zone and had walked out of the northern end of it, and who were here now at 0600 in the morning for no official reason, except that they wanted to be. Nobody made a speech. Nobody said anything ceremonial. It was the military, not a movie, and the people standing there were professionals who expressed things through presence rather than performance. Morgan shook her hand. His grip was firm and brief, the same as always. Good luck, Sergeant. Thank you, sir. Reyes said nothing. He just looked at her for a moment with those weathered eyes that had seen 22 years of everything, and then he nodded once, and that nod contained more than most people's speeches. Vasquez walked with her to the vehicle. At the door, he stopped. He had something in his hand, a small piece of paper folded twice. He held it out. She took it. She unfolded it. It was a frequency notation, a specific band, a specific pattern signature written in his handwriting. New signal, he said. Been tracking it for 3 days. Pattern looks familiar. He paused. I'll handle it. She looked at the notation. She looked at him. She felt something move through her that she would have difficulty describing later. Not pride exactly, not relief, exactly something that was the specific feeling of having built something that continues after you leave it. Yeah, she said, you will. She got in the vehicle. She drove south toward the regional transit point, toward the connecting flight, toward the training program that was waiting for her. She did not look in the rearview mirror, not because she was leaving anything behind, but because everything she was taking with her was already inside her, already part of what she was and what she was going to become. She drove with the sealed envelope from Carver on the seat beside her, and Santos's mother's letter in her chest pocket, and the frequency notation from Vasquez folded in her palm, and the 11 days and the valley and the tower, and 40 minutes riding with her like they always would. She drove into the morning. She drove full size. A 26-year-old communications specialist ignored 4 times in 3 days by men with 30 years of certainty between them had looked at a kill zone that 480 Marines were walking into, had decided that the cost of action was less than the cost of silence, and had gone alone into the desert and done the only thing left to do. She had been right about everything. She had paid the price anyway. And in the end, the truth had not needed anyone's permission to be true. It had only needed one person willing to carry it all the way to the end, regardless of what it cost. Elena Hart was that person. She always had been.